Great, thanks. Thanks, Griffin, and thanks, Caresoft. We appreciate the support. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. You're joined by a collection of esteemed guests. Before we dive into our discussion, I would like to set the stage a bit with a bit of context, which is the National Security Memorandum 22, or NSM 22, issued by the White House on April 30th, 2024. This memorandum marks a pivotal update to U.S. policy on critical infrastructure, security, and resilience, replacing the decade-old Presidential Policy Directive 21. NSM 22 recognizes that the threat landscape has shifted dramatically from counterterrorism to strategic competition, with nation states fueled by advances in technology like AI and increasingly sophisticated cyber operations from adversaries. What makes NSM 22 so important is it calls for a unified whole-of-government effort to strengthen the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure, sectors like energy, transportation, communications that underpin our security and economy. It empowers the Department of Homeland Security with CISA as a national coordinator to lead this charge while emphasizing collaboration within industry, the intelligence community, and international partners. For the defense industrial base, including the SMBs that we RADICL support, NSM 22 highlights the need to prioritize resilience against nation-state threats that can disrupt supply chains and cascade across sectors. Today, I am proud and pleased to introduce our panelists for the discussion and talk about how we turn policy into action to protect our critical infrastructure and the defense industrial base. First, I'd like to introduce retired General Glen VanHerck, the former commander of NORAD and NORTHCOM, a leader in homeland defense. Next, I'd like to introduce Kevin Phillips, who is the chairman of ManTech and has over 20 years with and ManTech, where they have 20 where they're 20 years of experience shaping technology solutions for national security. And then finally, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, former Carrier Strike Group 5 commander and current cybersecurity expert at the Foundation for Defensive Democracies. To kick things off, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves personally and take a few minutes to express their own unique insights around this general theme and the concern it brings from a national security perspective. We'll start with General VanHerck, followed by Kevin Phillips, and then Admiral Montgomery. General, I'll refer to you as Glen going forward. Please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Chris, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you to talk about this really important topic. I'm glad you started off with NSM 22 and resilience. I think that's crucial, and I think of it as a whole of nation, not a whole of government challenge where we build resilience. And I say that because as I got into command of NORAD and NORTHCOM, and as you know, I was the previous commander until about 1 year ago, what I found was that about 80% of the force that flows to any crisis around the globe comes out of our homeland. And about 80% of the force will be reliant upon not federal entities, but entities, state, local, commercial, industry, whether that be in transportation, energy, our SPODs, our seaports, our airports, rail infrastructure, and much more. And all of that is crucial to ensuring that we can get out of our homeland to respond in a timely manner to a crisis around the globe. And so much of that is reliant on small businesses, local communities that support the generation of the force from local facilities, whether that be an Air Force base, Army facility, et cetera. That's all crucial. All of that is being challenged today, with precursors being put in place to challenge our ability to project power in a timely manner to respond around the globe, with the intent to destroy our will as well. When I say that, I'm talking about people in a time of crisis being able to go to the ATM and get money out of the ATM, to have the ability to show up at a gas station and get gas out of the pump, or have running water on a day-to-day basis. And much of that critical infrastructure is being held accountable, not only to power project, but also, as I said, destroy the will. And imagine trying to fight a fight forward or respond to a crisis forward, while now domestically you're being challenged as well. And so much of that is ongoing today. We've seen that here with the Typhoon series, with our telecom industries and other critical infrastructure that's being compromised on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's really crucial that we acknowledge that as we look at this problem set, especially here in the homeland. I'll expand just a little bit more as we look at defending our homeland. Much of the defense in our homeland does also rely on local energy, power coming from our commercial sources or local communities. As we look to build out Golden Dome, as President Trump has talked about, it'll be crucial as we look from the space-based layer to the hypersonics to air and cruise missile, all the way down to counter UAS, that we build resilience in from the beginning. Resilience where we are reliant on those local, whether it be power, energy, you name it. We have to have resilience, and resilience is the foundation of deterrence. And the campaign plan that we had at NORAD and NORTHCOM was about demonstrating the readiness, responsiveness, and resilience on a day-to-day basis, not only within government, but also with those key stakeholders that are out there, state, local, as well as our industry partners that we must make sure that are part of our solution here. And so this topic is timely, it's absolutely relevant, and I'm glad you brought it up, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, General. Kevin Phillips. Kevin, you mind introducing
Sure.
yourselves and
Yeah,
your thoughts?
briefly, I spent 20 years as either the CFO, president, COO, CEO of ManTech International, which is a multi-billion-dollar defense contractor, but also a public company. So my framework is around having dealt with all of those types of entities in this cyber environment today. We all know that DoD and critical infrastructure are critical. I don't think people appreciate how critical they are, as also how much they're being looked at by nation states. Businesses tend to look at cybersecurity within a broader risk management framework, and therefore it tends to be one of many things that they look at. And businesses tend to prioritize IT budgets, which cyber is generally part of an IT budget, towards market positioning. And that puts cybersecurity at a disadvantage in terms of its budget for companies, which is a bad thing. That said, I always took the position that every function and every strategy requires IT in the business. IT, nothing gets done without IT. It doesn't matter these days. Everything needs a digital infrastructure, an application and infrastructure. And therefore, cybersecurity is critical to doing your strategic business. Nation states, and I know from the business that we've been in, but also from looking at incidents over 50 years within ManTech, nation states have spent decades mapping and learning and accessing or trying to access companies in our space. They have scale and they have more knowledge than you may think about you or the environment you're in and what you do. Most companies have legacy debt, which is a huge risk. And most companies historically have likely emailed a whole bunch of data that has accessibility, if it's not encrypted, that gives people more access to what your environment is or what you do or who you do it with. You have to assume that that adds more knowledge to them than you might imagine. It's safe to assume that no matter what size you are, you're on somebody's radar as a nation state if you do anything important these days. Now, knowing this as CEO, I spent over a decade working towards improving the security of ManTech, and I had to start with the IT budget. And we eventually got there towards a zero trust architecture. We had to start with eliminating technical debt, which was really big. Then we had to look, that's bringing down the debt. Then we had to narrow the networks that we had to support. Then we had to bring up the cybersecurity, and these are all in an annual budget cycle and review, and then bring all the applications and systems we had into a more secured environment, and then move towards a zero trust, which in and of itself was very difficult. So I would say the technical debt, the networks, the access and cybersecurity, as well as the data and applications are all important. I had to manage the IT budget annually as if I owned it. I didn't, but in order, that way you prioritize cyber along with other things that are important, and you bring cyber to an equal level, cybersecurity, to other applications over a 10-year period. That helps prioritize things. And when you move towards zero trust, you actually find during this whole process a whole lot more issues than you thought because the legacy data that's out there. And you have to start reducing that boneyard. It's really important. Any environment, just as an aside, any environment that you defer, delay, or prioritize upgrades and patches kills you. If you can't stay up current on patches or upgrades, you're going to be behind day one. To that end, what I learned is utilizing infrastructure as a service, cloud services, where they're doing the upgrades for you, or cyber as a service, using certain cyber firms who can do that on your behalf, became hugely valuable because you can only cover so much footprint within your own company, given the types of things that you're doing. So utilizing that and moving towards a zero trust architecture really helped because what I call going dark, which is what zero trust is, really matters. So that's basically the output. The initial discussion I have is these are really important. Don't assume that you're not known, and don't assume that somebody's not targeting you today.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that intro and that insight. Admiral Montgomery.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Hey, I want to thank RADICL and Carahsoft for putting this on. And I'll start by saying, and I'm gonna echo a lot what General VanHerck, what Glen said earlier. Look, to me, this is about defending the homeland. Every president since 9/11 has said my #1 priority is defending the homeland. President Trump said it in 2017. He said it. He hasn't put out his national security strategy. Trust me, it'll be #1 in there. And the one thing I'd say is, I think when he visualizes defending the homeland, he probably first and foremost thinks about the border. What I would tell him is, I'm not passing judgment on the border one way or the other. It's a serious issue. There's two other things that are actually probably at a national security level even more challenging for us. One is missile defense, which I won't go into, only to say there's a Golden Dome announcement coming out, or Iron Dome, Golden Dome. We do need to do it. This is one of those 50-50 things. There's great opportunity here for us to actually defend ourselves with a space-based system that can really get us there. And there's a chance to screw it up. All right, we'll flip the coin over the next couple months. The second one is the one we're talking about today. That's the defense of our critical infrastructures in cyberspace, and they really are at risk now. I love that General VanHerck mentioned military mobility today. FDD, my think tank, put out I wrote called "Military Mobility Depends on Secure Critical Infrastructure." Boring title, but hits right on it. That's at FDD.org. Tells you this. It tells you exactly what you heard. There are our ability to move troops, equipment, supplies to the fight runs on civilian 69 strategic airfields, 19 strategic sea lift ports, and 40,000 miles of STRACnet, strategic railroad, about a third of the railroad. And the DoD does a fantastic job on bases. There's 2 water systems, 2 power systems, although one of them might be cattle batteries from China, but be careful with that, and 2 communication systems. It's the Noah's Ark of critical infrastructure. And you load the tank at Fort Cavazos on the rail car that we own, and off it goes. And as it leaves the base, all secure, everybody waving at it, it hits Norfolk Southern. And that's like Mad Max Thunderdome, for critical infrastructure, under attack on a constant basis from criminals and nation state actors. And you can repeat this with ports, rail, aviation all over the United States. Here's the problem. Not only do we know it, guys like General VanHerck and I have known this for 4 or 5 years at least, and understood the risk that we had with these privately held or utility held transportation networks. The Chinese know it, and we know they know it because they went again and exploited it. And it's something called Volt Typhoon. They did operational preparation of the battlefield. That's what General VanHerck and I would do before we struck something. We would do operational preparation of the battlefield. We would either through ISR or other means, through positioning of aircraft, however we're going to impose our will on a country, we did it ahead of time. They did operational preparation of the battlefield in cyberspace, malware or other malicious cyber activity in networks of rail, aviation, ports, power grids. We've publicly acknowledged Guam, Hawaii, and a little bit of the West Coast. Chinese have a map. I think we know that. They probably got the Midwest and the East Coast as well. I say this because it's weird in cyberspace. If the Chinese had done the equivalent physical thing, like strapped 1,000 backpacks with 20 pounds of TNT in each one, and like little note that said, courtesy of the PLA with a big middle finger at us, right? We'd practically be at war. But because it's cyberspace, we're kind of like, well, my hat tip to you, which it should not be. The hat tip is to espionage. That's Salt Typhoon. That's another event that happened. Volt Typhoon was operational preparation of the battlefield, which means we've got to do better. We've got to do both deterrence by denial, deterrence by punishment. I'll just talk about the punishments and stuff that Cyber Command and our intelligence community should be doing overseas. Deterrence by denial is us having a better defensive system. That's where NSM 22 that you brought in came in. It was the Biden administration's way too late. Like they were, this 1-year review process took them 3.5 years. And at the very end of administration, they kicked out an NSM. Never a good thing. Even if the next guys keep it, they don't keep the spirit or intent of it. But I was pretty critical of it anyway, because what it would say is things like, we need to prioritize, not thou shalt have a prioritization list that, in other words, there's probably 500 critical assets out there nationwide. These are big, like Southern companies, power grid, things like that. There's 500 assets out there that we could prioritize as the things that we have to protect, because we can't protect everything. We can't be everywhere, everything all at once. We've got to be able to prioritize. The NSM said prioritization is a good thing, and then didn't give a rule set for it. They're the government. Give a rule set for it, and then explain what the benefits and burdens are on those companies. It didn't do that. It didn't call out space even though CISA begged them to, it didn't call out space as a critical infrastructure because they couldn't get NASA or Commerce to agree who it should be, the Sector Risk Management Agency. Really, neither one would raise their hand, and DOD was stomping anyone who was raising a hand anyway. But my point on this is, on a really important issues, it failed to make the right decision. So pretty critical. And SM22 is like a great description of the problem. It's like you put a master's degree student on the problem, not a White House-led decision-making process. And then what I'll say, the only thing that kind of makes me go, well, that wasn't so bad after all, is that the new crowds come in, and they've done a lot of important things. The president's a disruptor, I get it. But his disruption in the public-private collaboration space is turning into destabilization. He's canceled the CPAC, which ran our sector coordinating councils between which allowed the proper exchange of information and the operational consensus building that went on there. It also got rid of the enduring framework that's at NSA. That's another part of how the Defense Industrial Base works with them. And they got rid of the Cybersecurity Review Board, kind of like the NTSB for cyber. And I would just say the Department of Transportation is not canceling that NTSB anytime soon. Not that you can, it's in law. But you know what I mean? They did all these things that really undermine the public-private collaboration. And I'd be like, if you had a new plan, I'd be cool with it. But you better have announced that plan while you're breaking all the China. You better bring in the new China. Don't tell me that, oh, I've ordered China. It should be here in 3 to 6 months. So that's why I'm a little worried. NSM 22 didn't quite do it. It was your normal, like, government bureaucratic half buttery, right? And then I'm a little worried what this administration's done. So Homeland Defense really important, cyber really, really important inside that. And I think the enemy's on their front foot, and we're a little bit on our back foot.
Thank you, Admiral. It's a sobering perspective. Unfortunately, the state of things, good intentions don't go all that far. Just in my experience, on the cybersecurity front, there needs to be, I think, as you point out, clear directives. And I think in the corporate world, there needs to be a motivation to allocate budget that is real. And I think CMMC hopefully is going to get us there, at least on the budgetary motivation side, to begin to invest the resources required for the civilian infrastructure to up level. But there's a lot of work to do. So let's move into our first topic. So the first one, I'm gonna, this is, topic is just, generally nation state threats, around our CI and the DIB. And so, in general, first question to you, so from your time at NORTHCOM, how have you seen, since that time, nation state threats evolve their tactics? And are there gaps in deterrence that might be encouraging some of these tactics, and the rise in attacks?
Yeah, Chris, great question. First, I would say, what we used to see was primarily cyber espionage, and that was a concern the technological aspects of what we were giving up. But over the last 5 to 10 years, maybe less, what we've seen them do is transition. When I say them, I'm primarily talking about the PRC, but we have others that have transitioned now more into the more aggressive implementing what I call precursors into our critical infrastructure to take advantage of, ahead of crisis. And so they've changed that along the way quite significantly. Along the way, what they've also changed, they're changing our culture by using the information space and doing it with cyber techniques through social media and other ways to go after our actual culture and the use of artificial intelligence to do that. They are in the middle of our political discussions. They fan the flames of political divide in this country through the use of cyber techniques and cyber capabilities as well. Overtly, I would argue that our lack of calling them out publicly, exposing them publicly, has not helped in the deterrence means. And when you don't get called out publicly and you're not named and shamed by the government, what do? You keep pressing further and further. So I think we could have done more there. I think some of the key gaps, and we talked about it a little bit, are poor basic cyber hygiene, poor cyber training that allows them to have access into key infrastructure, especially on some of our smaller businesses that probably don't have the funding to go after the latest capabilities to defend or pay for that. And they haven't prioritized that. And so I think that has hurt us a little bit. So updated policies, updated capability, I think would actually help us significantly. You mentioned CMMC standards. Not that tough. But if you are going to do business with the government, you need to meet the CMMC standards for cybersecurity, cyber resiliency. And we need to make sure everybody's educated on what that is, what that means, and that they're investing in the capabilities. Right now, what we see, especially in the defense industrial base, is that the major companies providing platforms such as airplanes, ships, you name it, are relying on a supply chain that goes significantly deep into the small business industry. And that's our key vulnerabilities for access into the broader critical infrastructure, if you will. I hope that makes sense, Chris.
It does, absolutely. I do find it, lots of things there. I mean, obviously, it is remarkable we live in a time when, foreign nations, who are adversarial to the U.S. can actually directly influence the youth of our country through a communications medium. It's something I'm not sure somebody would have thought, 10 years ago would it ever be
Hey, Chris,
contemplated all out.
Can I jump in on that? I have to tell you,
Sure.
TikTok has got me. I helped write the law. I mean, I wrote the original one that failed, and then was part of the team that wrote the second one. It's critical. I cannot tell you, Glenn was right on. I mean, the manipulation that goes on in there. Back when it was transparent, we could see it. An issue like Uyghur genocide was 40 times more likely to be seen on a certain number of Instagram users than the equal number of TikTok. Other Taiwan issues were about 15 to 20 to 1. You stand with Ukraine, 8 times more likely. Whereas, the stand with Hamas was 8 times more likely to be on TikTok than on Instagram. In other words, on each issue that affected U.S. national security, Israeli national security, there was real nasty anti-Semitism and hate speech that proliferated on TikTok at an unreasonable level. Now, they've cut the transparency off, so we can't see it now, but clearly this was manipulated by a Chinese algorithm. There is no logical solution, no other logical answer than that. Congress decided that. The president signed the law. The courts have stood it up. President Trump is trying to end run it a little bit. And I have to tell you, if he sells it to someone where the algorithm is maintained in China, he is going to unwittingly be supporting, and I'm confident this is unwitting. I don't really believe he understands what's happening here. He's going to unwittingly allow the Chinese Communist Party and their intelligence agencies to continue to pump in a social narrative and a political narrative to 18 to 35 or 15 to 35-year-olds who predominantly use social media, especially TikTok, is their primary news source.
Yeah.
This is a danger to the core fabric of the United States, and we've got to take action. I know that's not the exact topic here, but Glenn made me think of it with his discussion. I think he's right on.
Yeah. No, we could talk a lot about that. And I've got 3 teenage boys, and it's terrifying. Um, but back to back to cybersecurity and supply chain. Kevin, obviously, you are you live in the supply chain. What are your thoughts in terms of how these nation state threats actually impact, influence the supply chain and our reliance on it?
Well, there's a whole set of things I think the government has started doing to try to address it, like foreign ownership of companies that then have access into, whether it's through investment or through actual outright ownership, to critical infrastructure or to the defense industrial base. It's really important to minimize your foreign ownership for a country that's going to be deemed a threat to the United States. If you want to support critical infrastructure in the United States, I think that's a persistent thing. Speed of technology means you have to get ahead of reacting and preventing things. If somebody tells you that a foreign piece of equipment is not trustworthy, there's a reason they're telling you that. You need to refresh that. You need to eliminate it, right? So foreign ownership, foreign technology that's identified as a risk. And then I get back to the technical debt issue is technology is advancing so fast. If you don't move forward, I say moving towards modern technology, making the hard choice of clearing technical debt, you're not going to get out of the zone. You're just not going to get out of there. So you have to do that because they are persistent, they're strategic, and they are moving towards, as they've mentioned, causing harm or positioning to cause harm versus understanding and exploiting. And there's a big difference in that. So that means time matters in this regard. I'm a big proponent of moving towards cloud native capabilities because I've seen it work. It's very difficult, but I've seen the benefits of that. I'm a big benefit of making sure you reduce what you do to maintain and sustain a system that if you don't do it, puts delay in the strength of your capability. That's the patching and upgrade thing. If you can't do it yourself with your staff, get it onto a platform that's done for you, pure and simple, and then get people to help monitoring because it's a new environment. There's risk in that environment. And Chris, you know that. Cloud to cloud environments and the applications are a big risk. You need somebody who knows how to find those threats and identify them. Your staff can't always do that. So I think that the use of third-party cyber providers, and I don't care if they're large like CrowdStrike or like you, it doesn't matter, to do a review of your environment, especially the cloud and then inside, is a big deal because then you find things and you know the roadmap of the unknowns that affect you today. And then you can clear that and then focus on the things that are going to affect you tomorrow, like I'm talking about, the boneyard of things that you've identified. Those are really important to get done.
Absolutely. And couldn't agree. And certainly in the SMB, what we see is, there's generally 2 main gaps: expertise and operations capacity. You can know what to do, have the expertise, but if you don't have the operations to actually go do anything about it, expertise is, invaluable, the intelligence, behind it. And security, a lot of security, a lot of actually solving this challenge. There is just work to do, and if you don't have the capacity to go do the work, you got to find help.
Real quick, I'll note that a lot of people have technologists in their business. I mean, that's what we do as a business, and everybody wants to do this types of thing because it's way cooler. That's what they do. But you're talking about at a scale and a speed against nation states that really you can't do at this level. You have to do it in a more common environment where possible.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And I guess it's, the SMB side, it's kind of, it's the specific class of operations that are often lacking because, what you need to do in cyber is, is distinct and unique from an operational perspective, and has the expertise and, imbued within. But, Admiral, you talked about Bolt Typhoon. What made that so different from previous, CCP malicious cyber activity? Why'd that stand out?
Well, look, and I'm assuming here, I mean, there's some unknown unknowns out there about how long things have been going on. And, Volt Typhoon is the name of a Chinese advanced persistent threat team. It has the Chinese are either typhoons or pandas, depending whose naming construct you're using, doesn't matter. but it describes what I called it operational preparation of the battlefield. I think what was unique, look, China has evolved. 15 years ago, when we were studying China, it was all about intellectual property theft. And that evolved over time to espionage, and then now to this operational preparation of the battlefield. The Russians evolved faster and have been deeper in espionage for years, and they've got like a complete side hustle going on with criminal activity, where off-duty or former contractors that work on behalf of or in support of GRU or SRV, SVR intelligence agents, Russian intelligence agencies, are doing a lot of the ransomware that we see in our country. So much so that ransomware actually dropped measurably, 25 to 30% in the 2 months immediately after the Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine, as their cyber people were helping with cyber issues. So I say that in the context that China has evolved. It's evolved quicker than Russia, and arrived at operational preparation of the battlefield. I believe Russia does it as well. I don't think they do as much of it. I don't think it's as big it's a prime directive the way it is for China. But China's trying to create the conditions so that, a few years ago, if General VanHerck and I were in our jobs, and I was in PACOM and he's in NORTHCOM, and we're ordering up forces to help us during a crisis or a conflict with China over Taiwan, we could get a few shots across the bow early that say, hey, soldiers, not so fast. You're not going to be moving well. And by the way, they were also in our public health and safety ones, so they could send messages to our public as well with, you are not secure. Your military mobility is not secure. Your public health and safety is not secure. So this is where the Chinese evolved to. This is part of a war-winning strategy they have. And by the way, they studied us after the 1995-96 Third Taiwan Strait crisis, where we had, U.S. forces, 2 aircraft carriers, and a bunch of other forces come into the Taiwan Straits area and, basically forced China to back down. By the way, I was on one of those carriers, and one funny side story is, for like the first 2 days, we're together doing dual carrier operations. We're like, well, this is going to be big news in China. We're getting nothing. It slowly dawned on us that we were 80 miles off their shore and they didn't know it. So we actually had to have our public affairs send photos to the South China Sea Morning Post, that then they got into, the Chinese cities, and then the Chinese started yelling at us. But I say that at the end of that, they've started a 25-year plan to strike at to identify our asymmetric weaknesses and devise tools to exploit that. And that's where that missile defense problem that I talked about earlier comes from. And that's where this cyber problem comes from. So that's why this is unique. It is a war fighting and potentially war-winning tool of our prime adversary.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, let's move on to our next topic, which is building cyber resilience for critical infrastructure and the defense industrial base. Glenn, so the military, as you mentioned earlier, the military does depend significantly on critical infrastructure. And are there things that can be done, should be done, to help strengthen the resiliency of that infrastructure? Should there be a nation state level broad cyber attack, possibly in the event of a wartime footing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first is we have to partner with those that we're going to rely on in the time of crisis, well, actually day-to-day time of crisis, or even in conflict. So many of those that we rely on don't even know that we're going to rely on them. Our plans are in place, but we haven't effectively communicated that we're going to rely on this rail line, this bridge, this single point of failure. And we need you to ensure that you are defending that appropriately. And so that means that the DoD and others need to assume a little bit of risk, bring some of those key stakeholders into the discussion, and let them know just how much we're intertwined in our ability to project power from our homeland. So I think sharing of key information and educating would help understand. Likewise, I think we need to build that relationship to where those key stakeholders and entities we're going to rely on don't have a fear of the government. The government, is here to help you. So many people kind of fear that. Actually, what we're counting on them to do, as NSM 22 points out, is report those detected incursions so that we can then go back and develop capabilities to counter those incursions and look and assess the potential for exposure. So I think having those entities, whether they're small businesses in the supply chain or whether they're key ports where they're going to project power from, ensure that they're comfortable reporting that to the government so that we're taking a look at that. Fine. We ought to go look at our policies and laws, because today we're limited on just how much we can go look at that critical infrastructure from a government perspective and know just how vulnerable we are. We only know what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And that's what should concern us the most, is those vulnerabilities. I think campaigning every single day in our homeland with those stakeholders to demonstrate readiness, responsiveness, and resiliency goes a long ways to strategic deterrence. And strategic deterrence is much more than the nuclear, the triad, if you will. It's about our deterrence by denial. It's our ability to take a punch in the nose and get back on our feet and go. And the more you demonstrate that, the more likely it'll have an impact on somebody who will believe they cannot be successful in their objectives. And that in itself is deterrence overall. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we need to name and shame. We need to expose those actors and put them on public display and make sure that the rest of the world knows. Our network of allies and partners is a great asymmetric advantage that we have, and we should share with them what we see the PRC and others doing so that they understand the risk they inherit as they buy those equipment and capabilities from countries such as the PRC and Russia.
Yeah. I'm going to go, yeah, I'm going to feed out that a little bit. I think it was, either you or Mark that talked about, 500 companies. You get some rough number of, there's a smaller number of companies in the civilian infrastructure that are more material, to, in support of our, military, being able to operate in the event, of, in the event of a significant national incident. CMMC used to have, 3 levels. Now there's 2. And I looked, when the prior draft came out, level 3, had some of the types of measures that I would look for if I were building in deep resilience. Level 2 is good, but it's not what you would actually need to have in place to defend against or have resiliency against a true nation state level motivated threat. The fact that there is no level 3 anymore, I find curious, because why as a nation aren't we identifying what should be a smaller segment of companies that should be at that highest level of resiliency? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Now, Chris, I couldn't agree more. That comes back to partnering with those stakeholders, those key folks we're going to rely on, and ensuring they're at the highest level of cybersecurity and resiliency that we can make them for national security purposes, and then not hide it. We should make sure, from a deterrence by denial perspective, that we are proud that we're ready, responsive, and resilient. And I think that's part of a campaign plan in our homeland.
Yeah. Agree. All right. So, Kevin, another question, from your perspective, ManTech's, and what you've seen within your supply chain, are there technologies or strategies, like zero trust or continuous threat monitoring that you have found or believe are most effective, in hardening critical infrastructure or the DIB, just from a prioritization of investment perspective?
Yeah. So look, assume that they've learned to live off the land, which basically means they've already accessed your network. You can't tell from the current pattern that they're in there because they're part of your normal noise.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to make the cost of them penetrating your network expensive and timely, and that requires a significant change to how you're securing your network if you've got a legacy one. So I'm going to beat the drum again on getting rid of technical debt. On the operational technology side, microsegmentation for workloads really matters. On the IT side, modernize, reduce the complexity, clear your boneyard once you've done it as quickly as you can. Patches and delays kill. We went to zero trust. It took us a few years to get the systems to where they can accept zero trust. And the zero trust process was very difficult because it's a big cultural change, right? It's literally saying, we're going from defense in depth to don't trust anything on your network, line every person to a system to a set of data. It's very complex, but it works. And while it secures your data and your systems and your people's access, it also creates these threads where people, the bad guys have to start re-engineering how they find things. So if they have start doing that and you have somebody monitoring the network, like yourselves, you'll be able to see those patterns and you'll find things you didn't know and you can clear them out. The goal is to make it very expensive and hard for folks to do it. And you have to change the environment from which you're in to do that. That's why zero trust, cloud, whatever you're doing, and it's simplifying, complexity kills.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. So I think, I think we have time for one more question, perhaps before, maybe two, before moving to Q&A. Admiral, one of the things that you certainly we see is that SMBs often struggle with the resources required to meet regulations like CMMC. Are there certainly policy incentives or other ideas that you might have that could help protect them from these nation-state threat actors without breaking the bank?
I'll put this in context. So CMMC is very much about companies that are going to do work within the defense industrial base and DFARS and in the military. So, but I want to say broadly, there's CMMC, and I think CMMC is coming back because its origin story is coming back into the Pentagon. So I think it's going to happen. But it's also about companies themselves following basic cybersecurity standards, making that investment. And this is hard. I know it's hard on small and medium-sized businesses, but I mean, here's what I tell you. In almost all polling that's done, companies that have not had significant ransomware incidents take risk. Companies that have had significant cyber incidents invest in security, right? And reduce risk. And here's why. We found out watching, this is small, and then the smaller side of medium-sized companies, they work on anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 week floats. That is, they can carry inventory and workforce and continue to exist without income coming in because they've had a major ransomware incident for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. Here's the challenge. Just identifying and dealing with the initial brush fire of the ransomware incidents, an average of about 10 to 14 days. Then the recovery, getting yourself up and operating properly, can be 3 to 4 weeks. What we saw in Change Healthcare was about 4 weeks into this, we started to realize actually about 3 weeks into it, that the pharmacies and the small medical clinics were about to shut down. When they were about to lay off workers and potentially go into a condition from which they would not exist. They would be bought for parts, so to speak. And therefore, we, as a government, through $4 billion worth of advanced Medicare, free receipts, Medicare, Medicaid payment. And just so you know, as a taxpayer, it's usually a 25% loss rate on that. So we lost $1 billion because of Change Healthcare. I know they lost money too, but so did we. Why do we do this? Because small and medium-sized businesses cannot take the hit. So when I go to somebody who says, should I do this CMMC? It's so hard, or these other standards you're giving, it's so hard. Let me tell you what's harder. What's harder is recovering in time to not have to lay off your favorite workforce, right? Recovering in time that you don't order inventory, for 4 weeks from now. So all you did is move your death march to 4 weeks later when you come back online. My point on this is, we all understand cybersecurity is a bill, and it's one of those things: you can pay me now or you can pay me later, and the pay me later is usually a sharp kick in the ass along with the payment, and the payment's much higher. So yes, CMMC is a pain in the ass, but it's probably the right way to do it. And added benefit there, if you don't do detriment, if you don't do CMMC, you're not going to be in the game. So
Provides a
it's
baseline.
painful. get it done.
Can I add to that real briefly? CISA allows and provides information on vulnerabilities through their, through their public-private partnership for things for people to find quickly and fix. NSA Cybersecurity Director provides free tools and free toolkits to people to fix. The government is trying its best to provide information to help firms either defending others or have to defend themselves. And then companies like ManTech, at some point, since we have CMMC 2.0 and we're zero trust, we had said, well, maybe we can offer tenants to our subcontractors. They could be tenants on our network if there's a pathway to do that. So, I don't know if we ended up getting that done, but there are things available to help speed up your defense. In addition to the roadmap, and I'm going to consider a very important roadmap that CMMC provides you to define what to prioritize to get to a baseline. Those are all really, really important, which is why we consider CMMC important, because it gives people a roadmap of what to prioritize.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. For sure. All right. Well, so before we open up the Q&A, I'm going to give each panelist a question to answer this one question. And it's really if you had to pick one single thing, one priority, whether it be military action, an industry initiative or policy reform, what would that one thing that you recommend in order to strengthen cyber resiliency against nation-state threats across critical infrastructure and the DIB, including SMBs? Kind of what's that top thing?
Okay, I'll go first. So I would want a whole of nation approach to national security and defense of our homeland. Not a whole of government, a whole of nation approach with a balanced approach, less away from deterrence by punishment and more towards deterrence by denial, which cyber resiliency and security figures directly into. And ultimately, it's much cheaper to not fight that fight and have that deterrence up front, have a so resilient nation that nobody ever thinks to take advantage of us in the first place. And so that would be my one thing I'd want to go after. Over.
I love that. I think the citizen cyber soldier type approach.
Yeah. I'd just at a tactical level, encrypt everything, assuming it's going to be taken so it delays the ability for people to use it. And strategically, the current public-private partnership has evolved over the last 20 years from a regulate, identify, remediate, and report concept, and that's what it is today. It would be great if there were, I'll say, carrots with industry to participate at certain levels to move towards a prevention and intervention approach, right? Industry prevents, government intervenes. And that's a higher level of discussion, but I think waivers or delays in reporting, things like that could incent people to participate at the levels that would be needed. Because I'm a big fan of public-private partnerships. I think there just needs to be a more value-added partnership in it.
Right.
I thought Kevin was going to tell me that he was going to use end-to-end encryption to send me his latest war plan. All right. So on the one thing, that's a tough one. I got two. So I'm going to just do two. I'll do them quick. Prioritization. I said it earlier. Prioritize. Let's understand what the top things are. I mean, if we can't protect the most valuable assets, we're in a lot of trouble. The other one I'm starting to really think about is Mike Waltz said something really smart. He's coming in as national security advisor. And they said, what's the big, what are you going to do about cyber that you haven't seen before? And he goes, I'm going to go on the offensive. And what I want to do is say, let me split that in two. One is, get Tim Hawk, the cyber commander, the forces he needs, which, by the way, I think needs a single cyber force. We'll just set that aside. And the IC, in Tim Hawk's other NSA hat, get him. That's downrange. I'm actually starting to think we need to be offensive on our networks. We need to be able to. We need to do a more concerted effort to have the Guard. It might be the National Guard. I'm not 100% sure. It's not going to, I don't want it to be the active forces. I don't want it to be the intelligence community. They don't belong on they're too busy and not legal to be on our networks. Law enforcement can't do it. I really think either CISA is going to get really hot on their hurt teams, which I just don't think are words I should stitch together, or the National Guard, we begin to organize them in an effective manner to use them to do this, because we're still telling these companies, don't hack back. And we're telling them, defend yourself against this nation state. By the way, nation state shoots a cruise missile at you, we're good for you. We got it. But they shoot a cyber effect at you, you're on your own. And then we're not even there to help when they're under duress. So that's where I'd go, is probably that.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I kind of often think about, the challenge of all these SMBs. To me, it's kind of, weekend paintball warriors fighting Navy SEALs. And it's not a fair ask. If they're on their own. Um, well, gentlemen, really appreciate all the incredible insights, and experience. I think at this point we could open it up to some questions from the audience.
That sounds great. Thank you all again. Like Chris said, very great insights. Thank you all for speaking. So if you do have any questions, just utilize the Q&A pod down at the bottom of your screen and we'll get through as many as we can. So the first one that I'm seeing here is, how does the DoD's new CMMC program figure into plans to support critical infrastructure?
I think I kind of answered that one when I talked about it. Look, it's going to be a required. I think it's back. I mean, it didn't go away, but I think it was going slow. I think it's back, and you're going to be required to answer the mail on on meeting the standards level. What's going to happen though is, what level do you have to achieve to get the kind of contract you're interested in? And getting to level, I think it's level 3. I can't remember what the highest level is now. Looks to me like you need to be able to withstand penetration testing done by a tester of the government's choice, not yourself, and run that at a high. It's well past compliance checklist, is what I'd say. So I'm not opposed to it. I mean, I know I'm opposed to how we've done it to you. I'm not opposed to it.
The next one we have is, what are the most common tactics used by nation state actors to target critical infrastructure?
Let me tell you what we've seen, but this is a company over 50 years, is people like owning a personal computer to gain access through their access rights. The identity management, using an identity to get in, has been a big deal and allows people to find things, finding vulnerabilities between one application and another that really weren't, especially as people move to cloud, was an area of concern. Using subcontractors to gain access to information, because what they're looking at is systems and data, right? And the systems they want to destroy and the data they want to take. And the question is how you prevent that from happening. And they've done a lot of things like that. And then once they're in your network, they try to move from one section to the other to get, I'll say, upstream to more intelligence and more information. That's why limiting the information flow from one area to another, that type of transfer and access control, is really important. And identity management becomes really important.
Yeah, and I'll add on a bit there. Agree with all of that. And one thing we also see, which is I'd say unfortunate, we have a lot of customers in the defense industrial base, and phishing is still just a remarkably successful tactic. And the amount of phishing incidents that we get involved in and responding to, and cleaning up things left behind, it's still a very prolific and unfortunately easy way in, that threat actors are able to leverage. And even nation states won't, if they get in with phishing, they'll keep their more advanced tools in their backpack.
Another one we have here is, what are the challenges in adopting AI-driven monitoring systems for cyber resilience?
Can I comment on that briefly? Then you guys can. So I think from a game changer, one of the biggest game changers that could happen is using AI for analysis, AI for software upgrade, moving from legacy software to current software. And I hope everybody's got scalable capabilities, is working on that now to make sure, because I think AI for analysis could be a big game changer for defending against scaled nation states.
Yeah, I didn't actually see a negative. I think combining AI with ML, like we've been doing. I mean, Glenn and I grew up in the military. We've had AI and machine learning running in the background of a lot of our systems for 25 years. I mean, particularly ML, machine learning, but even AI, when I think about how Aegis works, there's, in its automated mode. So, I mean, it's been there. So I don't think there's a I mean, is there a negative? There's probably, I could think, I'm sure if I was a safety conscious person, I could think of some negatives, but I think it's going to be absolutely required if we're going to compete in the attack vector world we're about to see.
Yeah, I think the artificial intelligence and the machine learning can help you with trending, and the amount of data to monitor gets overwhelming. So you need something to cue you to go where you're going to put your resources. And I think that's where it's going to help you. And I also think the amount of open source information with AI and ML that can be applied to that can cue and tip you to potential actors' activities. And that's something we need to look at on a day-to-day basis.
We have another one here. What SMB industries are at highest risk of nation threat actors in the DIB?
What specific industries within the DIB?
It says what SMB industries? I think that's specific is the question.
Small, medium size. You know, look, the ones that I've noticed, look, healthcare is getting hit the most. Just in general, I've found there's a sense of urgency to settling, and it's as close as we get to like really tying cyber to deaths. So for me, that's my highest sense of urgency is around them.
Yeah, I think we saw it go from defense related in the past, and we're seeing more public sector, water, transportation. Finance is pretty secure, but certainly they'll go after elements of finance and the ability to sustain day-to-day operations, gas, you name it. So I think it's a broad sector.
Yeah, I often wonder about also the defense tech industry, right? Silicon Valley is back at work plenty of defense tech. There are a lot of companies who are building technology. Some of it in Ukraine right now. Why would Russia not be trying to penetrate the networks of those companies and trying to get access to anything they can that could possibly disable that technology in the field of battle?
Yeah, anybody who can do force projection is in a critical system of doing that.
Yeah.
Cyber, I consider as a tool, just like a weapon system. Anything we're doing for force projection is they're focused on and how to counter it.
Yeah.
And we can just close out on our last one here. What emerging technologies are expected to have the greatest impact on cyber resilience?
I'll give you one: quantum encryption. I mean, it's going to be very helpful. It's also, putting my military hat back on, some bad news because quantum decryption. I think the Chinese have been vacuuming up every piece of encrypted classified information they can for a long period of time, and they're going to be running it through the quantum decryption gonculator as soon as they have it. But I think that if I'm looking out a ways, I think that there's some good security ahead. You'll be able to pass your war plans around all you want.
I agree with Mark. Quantum is a game changer, both from an opportunity and a vulnerability, and you got to win that race.